In 1979, 6 Americans were trapped in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. If caught, they'd be interrogated, tortured, or worse. The U.S. government, powerless, the embassy, overrun. Their only hope? A country that had no reason to help, but did anyway. And the escape plan? So ridiculous, it belonged in a Hollywood script. Only this wasn't a movie, it was real. And it just might be the greatest rescue mission you've ever heard of. Welcome to History, the home of profound, historic, and timeless tales. Twice a week, we bring you the stories that shaped our world. A cold rain fell over Tehran that morning, but the real storm was brewing inside the walls of the U.S. Embassy. For weeks, crowds had gathered outside, their chants growing louder, their demands fiercer. The country was in turmoil, still raw from revolution. When the United States granted asylum to the deposed Shah of Iran for medical treatment, the new regime saw it as proof of an American conspiracy. The anger in the streets was turning into something more dangerous. Inside the embassy, Mark Liek glanced at the clock. Just another day or so, he thought. Then came the noise, a distant rumble at first. Then a surge of voices, angry, urgent. He stood up, his pulse quickening. Something was happening. A guard shouted, and then the unthinkable. The front gates buckled under the weight of hundreds of protesters, and within moments, they were inside. The walls that had once protected them were now useless. Chaos erupted, windows shattered, alarms blared, and panicked voices filled the air. Staff members scrambled, some trying to destroy sensitive documents, others searching for a way out. The embassy had practiced for this, protocols, emergency plans, but nothing prepared them for the sheer force of the mob storming through the halls. Mark and his wife Cora locked eyes. They needed to move, fast. He saw coworkers being grabbed, forced to their knees, blindfolded. The militants weren't just taking the embassy, they were taking hostages. A back exit, a fleeting chance. Mark, Cora, and 4 others, Bob Anders, Joe Stafford, Kathleen Stafford, and Lee Schatz, slipped out in the confusion, their hearts pounding. Behind them, the embassy doors slammed shut, trapping their colleagues inside. The streets were no safer. Tehran was boiling over, and Americans were the targets. They weren't the only ones on the run. Elsewhere in the city, diplomats and U.S. personnel scrambled for shelter, ducking into back alleys, destroying documents, desperate to avoid the mobs. Some were captured within hours. Others evaded capture for days before they too were taken. The streets were a battlefield, and the 6 Americans knew one wrong move would mean certain death. The city was unrecognizable. Smoke curled from the streets where makeshift fires burned. Black banners bearing the face of the Ayatollah hung from the buildings. The 6 Americans kept their heads down, moving quickly, blending into the crowd as best they could. Every single step was a gamble. Every intersection a crossroads between escape and disaster. A few blocks from the embassy, a group of men gathered around a radio. One turned and locked eyes with Mark. He held his breath. Did they know? Were they caught? The man turned back, uninterested, but Mark felt his legs shaking as they pressed forward. At one point, a military checkpoint loomed ahead. Armed guards scrutinized every passerby. The group hesitated. Turning back would be just as suspicious as pressing forward. Their fates balanced on a knife's edge. Mark gripped Cora's hand as they stepped closer. A guard waved a man ahead of them through, then another. Then a voice, sharp, calling out. Mark's stomach dropped. A soldier was staring straight at them. For a moment, time stopped. Then, as if by some cosmic grace, the soldier turned away, distracted by another officer's command. The Americans kept walking. A few steps, then a few more. The checkpoint faded behind them, and with it a near brush with disaster. Their first instinct was to find shelter, but nowhere was safe. They reached the British residential compound, but their relief was short-lived. The British were wary. If they were caught harboring Americans, their own safety would be at risk. It wasn't personal, it was survival. And so once again, the 6 Americans were on the move. Bob Anders had an apartment nearby, a small, nondescript space, but at least it had a locked door. The 6 of them crammed inside, barely speaking, barely breathing. The city had become a hunting ground, and they were the prey. Every knock at the door sent them scrambling. Every distant shout felt like the beginning of the end. Days turned into weeks. The fear was suffocating, but it wasn't the only enemy. Boredom gnawed at them. They rationed food. They played Scrabble. Mark read books, writing down each title just to track time. The world outside kept turning, but they remained frozen, waiting for something, anything, that could get them home. Then, a miracle. A message from a Canadian diplomat, John Sheridan. "Why didn't you call sooner? Of course we'll take you in." Relief. Real, tangible relief. Under cover of darkness, the 6 Americans moved again, this time toward the home of the Canadian ambassador, Ken Taylor. There at last they could breathe. But safety came with a price, waiting. And waiting was dangerous. Every day, the risk of exposure grew. The Iranians knew that not all the embassy workers had been accounted for. It was only a matter of time before the hunt intensified. Escape plans came and went. None seemed viable. Then the CIA arrived with something different, something insane. A fake movie. The plan was the brainchild of Antonio Tony Mendez, a CIA specialist in disguise. With Hollywood contacts, he developed a ruse that sounded too ridiculous to be true, a Canadian sci-fi movie called Argo, supposedly scouting locations in Tehran. Mendez enlisted real Hollywood professionals to create fake business cards, film posters, and even a production office in Los Angeles. The CIA's deception was airtight. The Canadians provided genuine passports, adding a layer of credibility that couldn't be faked. The morning of the escape, the 6 Americans dressed the part, stylish clothes, thick-rimmed glasses, the look of film industry elites. But inside, their hearts pounded. Tehran's airport was no ordinary travel hub. It was a choke point, a trap, patrolled by guards who knew exactly what they were looking for. Every step through the terminal felt like walking a tightrope. The final checkpoint was the most dangerous. Any irregularity would spell complete disaster. An officer took longer than expected with Joe Stafford's passport, flipping through it, squinting at the photograph, then at Joe himself. He murmured something to a colleague. The 6 Americans stood frozen, hands clenched, feet aching to run, but unable to move. Then the boarding gate. A stewardess smiled, but Mark barely saw her. He took his seat, his fingers dug into the armrests. A metallic clang echoed from the front of the plane. A voice shouted in Farsi. Mark's breath caught in his throat. A figure stood at the entrance, scanning the cabin. Then the door closed. The engines roared to life. The plane taxied. Then at last, liftoff. Iranian soil fell away beneath them. And finally, the 6 exhaled. Canada had no obligation to help. Let's make that clear. There was no treaty, no grand diplomatic strategy at play, just a decision made by a few brave people to do what was right. It was a reminder of something greater than politics, greater than borders. And for Mark and his wife, it wasn't just an escape. It was a second chance. And for America, it was a lesson that some friendships, especially the one with the country just across our northern border, are worth everything.
New episodes drop twice a week only on Heath Story. If you'd like to support the channel, subscribe now, leave a like and a comment, and become a member by clicking below.